Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us for this final match in round 2 of the public sector debate competition. I'm Aniki Clark, and I'll be your host for this, what promises to be a very exciting match between the Social Development Commission and the Jamaica Information Service. And they will be debating the mood, be it resolved that the granting of significant salary increases to politicians in Jamaica was justified. Now, I must hasten to add that this is a safe space for debate. The views that will be expressed may not necessarily be those of the individual speaker, but to facilitate a debate and contention of ideas. At this point, I will invite the team from the Social Development Commission to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kimon Harris, and I'll be your first speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jardine Sutherland, your second speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jeremy Jones, reply speaker.
Thank you very much, Team SDC, and I now invite the Jamaica Information Service to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, first speaker.
Good afternoon, Charnel Henry, second speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Twyla Whelan, reply speaker.
Thank you very much, Team JIS. So the teams are no longer strangers. At this point, I invite the judges or partners from the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment to introduce themselves.
Thank you very much, Aniki. My name is Jermaine Barrett. I'm the chief adjudicator for the competition.
I am Curtis Wallace, and I am a wing adjudicator.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alan Carter, and I'm also a wing adjudicator.
Awesome. So introductions out the way, moods sealed, positions known. Let them begin the debate. And at this point, I'll invite Jeremy to marshal the debate from this point onwards. Enjoy. I'm sure it will be an exciting match. Right, teams?
It most certainly will be an exciting match. Thank you very much, Aniki. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I know my debate teams are very much aware of the rules, so this is for specifically our viewing audience. Let's talk about the speaker times. The first speaker on each team gets 7 minutes within which to present. The second speaker, 6 minutes. Then we enter an exciting period of cross-questioning, and I'll explain that when we get to that stage. And then we conclude the debate with 2 reply speeches, 1 per team. There are periods of protected times in the first 2 speeches. So the first minute and the last minutes are what we call protected minutes. You will know when you've spoken for 1 minute by the sound of an audible bell, a ding of a bell. All right. So it's an electronic bell, so we have to adjust the mechanism. There we go. And so that would signal that you've spoken for 1 minute. Then when you hear it again, it means that you have 1 minute to go in your speech. So you should be wrapping up. Then you'll hear 2 dings of the bell, which means that you are out of time. But you know, we're very kind as judges. So we give you 10 seconds extra to finish that final point. And so when 10 seconds grace period has elapsed, then you'll hear continuous dinging of the bell, which means you should stop. If you continue, you'll hear a strong, stern voice saying, out of order. You don't want to hear that. All right. Are there any questions, teams? So at this time, I call upon the first speaker from the proposition team to open our debate. Hear, hear.
Be it resolved that the granting of significant salary increases to politicians in Jamaica was justified. Moderator, judges, opponents, viewers, online, good afternoon. As the chief decision or policymakers who enact laws for Jamaica and the largest employment body, politicians must be compensated justly as we seek to attract the best country executives. As the first speaker, I will set the context for the increase. My second speaker will look at the functional importance of the role of politicians, and my third speaker will say why an increase was justified. However, permit us to define key terms from the moot. Significant is defined by the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as anything of a noticeable or measurably large amount. According to the same source, a politician is a person experienced in the art or science of government as a profession. The Collins Dictionary explains that when something or someone is justified, it means it is reasonable or acceptable. We often argue that we want better representation, that the quality of those who represent us needs to improve. But when it comes to a discussion of how we remunerate those who are in these higher government positions, we protest much. We want local government representatives to be articulate and highly intelligent, yet prior to the compensation review, politicians have not received a salary increase for 21 years in Jamaica, Brown Turner 2023. Councillors are supposed to ensure that residents have access to potable water, good roads, adequate street lighting, and that garbage collection is done on a regular basis. In addition to being social worker, mediator, crime stopper, psychologist, and a pharmacy to many, councillors who are nearest and dearest to citizens and have to serve Jamaicans in the most intimate of ways. Yet, prior to the compensation review exercise, they were only being paid $1.7 million per year. Can you imagine? The Jamaican government has taken on one of the most robust and comprehensive salary review packages in the country's history. I'm sure you would agree that a salary increase is never out of thin air and is oftentimes born from an extended waiting period, rising financial responsibilities, or an agreed decision at the time of employment. Opponents, judges, viewers.
Points of information.
Sure, you may go ahead.
What evaluation was used to determine the pay structure for the politicians' increase?
I'm happy you would have asked that question, and it's coming up shortly. Opponents, judges, viewers, we must understand that the salary increase, for your answer, was conducted using an agreed framework from 1971. These committees were formed 50 years ago, headed by prominent private sector individuals, Ashenaim 73, to Golding, to Oliver Clark, 2003, Golding, 2023, Jamaica Observer. The current framework is based on recommendations from those earlier committees. My opponents, as public service employees, let us not forget that you have received an increase, and might I add, a significant increase. On the matter of significant, whether it be 200, 300, or even 1%, who determines what is significant? Significant is relative. Allow me to explain the improved salaries for ministers, which places them at band 16 of the new system, along with several MDAs, reps, and executives. For years, many MDA reps were being paid higher than ministers who they had a direct reporting relationship with. My opponents, judges, and viewers, if you hold a managerial position, do you believe your subordinates should be paid more than you? Like, I guess it's a no. The compensation review process has fixed this anomaly. Additionally, the increase in salaries for politicians in this country amounts to 0.29% of the total budget for public sector salaries, Campbell 2023. Furthermore, the public sector salary restructuring exercise is done in the context where all the key economic indicators are performing well. The country has experienced 11 consecutive quarters of economic growth post-COVID, 20 consecutive prior to COVID. Debt to GDP is the lowest it has been in our history. Inflation is managed and stable. Unemployment is at the lowest it has been in our history, and our net international reserves are the highest they have been. This is a result of good governance, strong, educated, and experienced political leadership. It has been, like I would have explained, 21 years since politicians who are professionals has not received a salary increase. In justifying the increase, MP Lisana explained that within government, various heads of agencies earn an annual of $25 million, yet they report to a prime minister whose take-home pay is just over $9 million. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't need Albert Einstein to confirm that this does not add up. On the premise of equity, it is only reasonable, acceptable for politicians who are the highest serving members of the public service to receive a significant salary increase. The salary increase of these competent minds must be competitive and attractive. A doctor, attorney, or business mogul has the potential to earn up to $125 million per year. R. Danny Williams, who was seconded by the Life of Jamaica to serve in the government, expressed the need for qualified politicians. My opponents, what can be true is that the government should have invested more effort on educating our Jamaican citizens about the salary review process. Because we can admit that whilst a person from the anti-government crowd in this low-trust society would be left with the impression that only political representatives benefited from the compensation review exercise, this is not so, which could have minimized the social outrage that we would have seen. I implore you to view politicians as arbitrators of the country's economy and welfare. Hence, you pay the best people to work in the most important positions to achieve the best results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the first speaker from the team proposition, that's SDC, Social Development Commission. We now call upon the first speaker from Team JIS, Jamaica Information Service. Let's welcome the first opposition speaker.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished judges, I rise to open the opposition stance on the moot. However, before I do so, I must respond to a couple of points. Significant, you mentioned, and you used the word noticeable to describe significant. I think the only thing significant about the 20% increase that public sector workers got is that it is significantly 10 times less than the 200% that the politicians received. And I'm happy you mentioned supervisors who are getting less than their subordinates, because we are yet to get to the stage of the job factor evaluation that will fix the anomalies that exist within the system, because we're still waiting on phase 2 of the compensation restructuring exercise. We wish to state that we are not challenging the definition of the moot. We are also stating categorically that we are not in any way suggesting that politicians ought not to be appropriately remunerated. We will outline appropriate remuneration by international standards, look at compensable factors, and the inequity that arises from a piecemeal alignment of politicians with public sector workers. That said, we are strident in our stance that the granting of significant salary increases to politicians in Jamaica was not justified. In a public sector that prides itself in performance management, it is most disconcerting that performance management is not the basis on which politicians' salaries in Jamaica are increased. Mr. Chairman, it has been posited by our elected officials that the justification for the level of increase experienced by politicians is predicated on that received by public sector workers, using cabinet ministers as the benchmark and adjusting up or down according to the metric of the archaic Fletcher report that says the salary of the minister is pegged to that of the permanent secretary, earning $1 more per week than their civil servant counterparts. I submit that this was a flawed practice that is grounded in a premise of tradition, just because, rather than a system of appropriate measures of performance. Ladies and gentlemen, recall that the compensation restructuring exercise called for the use of a rigorous performance management and appraisal system, or PMAS, to determine whether public sector workers move up incrementally on salary scales. Under this system, you have objectives and targets that are outlined in operational plans. These targets must be met at a rate of at least 75% for a public sector worker to move up 1 increment per year. In this new structure, Miss Anderson, who is now 58, has 30 years experience and seniority and was previously at the top of her scale, has now been unceremoniously placed near the base of the scale at point 4 of 13 and will require 9 years of performing at a rate of 75% to get back to the privileged position that she earned through hard work, dedication, and loyalty. As an aside, let me point out that in 7 years' time when she retires, having given 37 years of service, she would not even be retiring at the top of her scale. But alas, I digress. A politician, however, MP turned cabinet minister, who need only be a Commonwealth citizen and 21 years of age to qualify for this position, who came into the system, say, 4 years ago, would not only realize this lofty salary, received all 3 increases within 12 months and be placed at point 13 on the scale with no performance measure and no years of experience under their belt, on the premise that they are not governed by PMAS and therefore will not move incrementally to get to the higher level of the scale. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you see where I'm going with this. Go ahead.
You mentioned that there is no performance measure. The greatest measure of accountability lies in the fingers of the electors.
And within the public sector, we use a performance management and appraisal system. Ladies and gentlemen, I really hope you see where I'm going with this. So the Fletcher report says pay the cabinet minister $1 more per week than the PS who runs the ministry, is responsible for 24,000 staff in the case of the Ministry of Health, and even more in education, is responsible for budgets and plans and operational plans. However, said cabinet minister is not subject to the rigorous recruitment process that includes a master's degree, 10 years of experience, and of course, we're talking about, you know, I have that job description here, and this is for CTD, it's not even for PS. A master's degree in public policy, public sector management, business administration, 10 years experience in senior policy management or policy advisory role. The PMAS system does not, they're suggesting that the PMAS system does not apply to them, so they place the minister at the top of the scale. So the standards of the public sector are only applied in some cases, but not others. Where's the equity in that? Might I point out that the vague job descriptions that were put forward for politicians could never fly in the public service, for the public servants that the Fletcher report is claiming to model and is still at the level of a green paper, stage 1, draft, with no obligation to carry it through to completion, but apparently somewhat successful in keeping the masses quiet. What are the compensable factors when evaluating jobs? According to the HR encyclopedia, education, experience, supervisory responsibility, budget accountability, and complexity. Might I add that now, after almost losing incremental movements and strong and strident advocacy by the Confederation of Trade Unions, the ministry has had to backpedal on and have now agreed in principle to incremental movement for the period under review. But guess what? We are still waiting for that incremental payment that was due from 2023, although the politicians got their full payments. Ladies and gentlemen, within the context of the struggles that many public servants have experienced with the compensation restructuring exercise, the significant increase in salary was tone deaf. Leaders must lead by example, and there must be a level of comparability between the level of increase that you take as the leader and what you give to your citizens. We are now in the 3rd year of this landmark exercise, yet many persons are actually worse off than they were at the outset due to the issues that were fixed by a non-taxable allowance, which resulted in a negative net effect when this allowance was discontinued. The anomalies are many, and the promised job factor evaluation is still to be done. Many public sector workers remain disgruntled while politicians smile all the way to the bank. Remember, too, that there were groups such as the teachers who were strong-armed into accepting the proposed increases with the threat that if they did not do so by a particular time, then they would have to wait for a long time. It cannot be that you are one of us when it suits you. If we as a country are going to pay politicians at the level of public sector workers, then perhaps by the same token, they should be recruited at the level of public sector workers, evaluated at the level of public sector workers, and held accountable at the level of public sector workers. Pick your poison. I thank you.
Thank you so very much for opening the case on behalf of the opposition team, JIS. We go back to the proposition team, Social Development Commission. Let's make their second speaker welcome. Here, here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me point out that the salary increase ranged from 50% to 432%. Politicians would have received to an extent of 200%. So you still have public sector workers who would have received up to 432%. And I'll further explain the point, my opposition. Just please follow with me. According to functionalism, different aspects of society exist because they serve a vital purpose. Sociologists Davis and Moore, in their 1945 thesis, argue that the greater the functional importance of a social role, the greater the reward. Some tasks in society are more functionally important, and people who fill those positions must be equally rewarded. The real question is, what values do us as citizens place on our politicians? Is the role of the Prime Minister any less compared to the head of NHT or the head of Port Authority? Yet, according to former Prime Minister Bruce Golding, they received 2 to 3 times the salary of the Prime Minister and the minister they report to.
Point of information.
Please go ahead.
Based on your use of the theory of functionalism, are you saying that a politician is 14 times more functional than a teacher or nurse or doctor in this country?
I am not saying so, but certain levels of work requires a certain level of skills, and based on the skill set, persons ought to be compensated accordingly. My opponents, we live in a meritocratic society where people move up the social strata based on achievements, and because of this, persons ought to be adequately compensated for their skills and their efforts. Now, there is a general acceptance that financial incentive is a significant factor in attracting individuals to a role. And many may argue, including my opponents, that the politician is a public service. It is beyond the public service, Mr. Speaker. It's a career, it's a profession, one with increasing significance in a modern world. The office of a politician is functionally important. And I am not saying other jobs in society are not, but certain levels of job in society do not require that level of skills. It's a multifaceted role, reviewing and passing of legislation, limitless hours of work, and they have to be consistently on the ground attending and addressing issues. It's not any and everybody can become a politician. And because of this, Mr. Speaker, they should be adequately compensated. Leaders of countries such as Singapore, Hong Kong, and the United States of America are amongst the highest paid officials globally. The high salaries are meant to attract the brightest government officials. It is used as a pull factor. Now, we recognize that Jamaica's economy is not as robust. However, we believe the need to attract the best warrants greater pay. The Global Parliamentary Report 2012 postulates that the average policymaker in the Caribbean is 52 years old. And because of this, they tend to maintain a traditional perspective on how society is governed. Now, Talcott Parson, a sociologist, opines that in order for a country to achieve development, it must move away from traditional ideology. As Jamaica moves towards a modernized society, the need to be more innovative and forward-thinking is pressing. And we have had several channels, different webinars to attract persons to the profession, but the outcome has been less than desirable. So much so that political analyst Paul Ashley in an article vocalizes, politics is never a worthwhile financial endeavor, and people are not willing to invest their physical or mental capacities in Jamaica's politics. An increase in salary, therefore, increases the probability of pulling those with more mental acuity to the profession. Herbert Gans, a functionalist, posits that there has to be, not at this time, Herbert Gans, a functionalist, posits that there has to be disparities in wages in order to encourage social mobility. As individuals aspire to self-actualization, the disparities are inevitable, and they actually act as a motivating factor. And qualified people who fill those positions must be rewarded more than others. I posit that if we did not have social mobility, persons will become frustrated, demotivated, Mr. Speaker, lackadaisical. The success of any country is directly linked to governance and leadership. It is therefore imperative that persons at the helm of the hierarchical structure be properly compensated. If not correctly compensated, Mr. Speaker, fewer people may want to dedicate themselves towards governance, which may result in poor leadership and ultimately anomy. Anomy, Mr. Speaker, is a Jamaica in disarray due to lack of norms and little regulation to encourage cooperation. The role of our politicians is functionally important. Mr. Speaker, do we put the chicken before the egg, or do we put the egg before the chicken? In other words, my opponents, do we continue on the same trajectory and demand more of our politicians, or do we adequately compensate the position of politicians to attract more creative ideas and continue to grow the economy so that all can benefit? The secretary and the boss cannot and will not get the same pay based on the functional importance of each role. Increasing politicians' salary was justified based on the functional importance of the job. It also increases the probability of a wider talent pool, facilitates social mobility, and prevents anomy. Compensation of these political portfolios to the tune of significant increases was justified. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Madam Second Speaker, representing the Social Development Commission. We go once again to Team JIS to hear from their second speaker this time. Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, members of the audience, my opponents, good afternoon. The proposition has put forward an argument that I, in good conscience, cannot allow to take root in the minds of you good and gentle people. You see, they keep positing this term of functional role, that the leaders of the country play a more functional role than somebody. I beg to differ that a country cannot operate without police officers, without nurses, without teachers. But countries exist where the office of the prime minister or president has been vacant for some time, but they still survived. Also, they keep mentioning that they need to attract the best and the brightest. But history has shown in Jamaica here that politicians do not leave the service due to salaries. They stay well into their golden years. That cannot be the reason you want to attract the best and the brightest. It has to be something else. Today we stand to debate a critical issue that strikes on the heart of justice, fairness, and responsible governance in Jamaica. The mood before us is, be it resolved, that the granting of significant salary increases to politicians in Jamaica was justified. And the opposition, we, firmly believe that these increases were not justified, and I will present some compelling arguments to support our stance. First, let us look at the outdated framework that was used to calculate these salary increases. You see, in 1980, the SASO committee was established to examine the emoluments of parliamentarians. And they recommended that cabinet ministers' salaries be tied to permanent secretaries, as my first speaker said. Further to that, in 1972, not 71, my opponents, the Fletcher framework came into being that established the rest of the salary percentages for political positions. Now, this framework was last updated in 1986. That's 37 years ago. Yet, today it is being used
Point of information.
not at this time, to be applied to an economic reality that is vastly different from 1986. The framework does not explain why a cabinet minister's salary is pegged to a permanent secretary, nor does it state why the MP and the prime minister should earn certain percentages, respectively above and below a cabinet minister. This framework is a relic of a bygone era, and it is no longer fit for purpose. Relying on such an antiquated system does not spell fiscal responsibility, and we risk making decisions that are arbitrary and unjustifiable. The framework also does not either allow for considerations of the current economic climate and whether a salary increase would be just at this point in time. Secondly, let us examine the issue from a local, regional, and international perspective. When factoring the GDP, the significant salary increases granted to our politicians does not compare favorably. Let us take a deep dive. According to Worldometer 2022, Jamaica, with a population of almost 3 million people and a GDP of 17 billion US dollars, now pays its head of government almost 200,000 US dollars. In contrast, Trinidad and Tobago, with a population half the size of Jamaica,
point of information.
not at this time, let me finish this, has a GDP of 30 billion US dollars and pays its head of government more than 100,000 US dollars less than what we currently pay our prime minister. Now, even further afield in the United States, there is a country, the United States, with 333 million population and a GDP of 25 trillion with a T. They pay their head of government, who now runs the largest military machinery, the world's second largest economy, only $400,000. That is just 2 times what we pay our prime minister. Now, by the sheer scale of our economies, it makes no sense. Significant salary increases for politicians, when juxtaposed against the country's GDP, highlight a lack of economic prudence and sustainability. Remember the Jamaican proverb, no hang your basket where you can't reach it. When one hears that their prime minister, an elected official, a public servant leader's compensation will be moving from $9 million to $28.6 million, the shock value is undeniable. So let's simplify it further. This year, 2024, Canadian MPs received a 4.4 salary increase. Australian politicians got a 3.5 increase, and they were both based on average wage bumps. In Jamaica, our politicians have awarded themselves a 100 to 300% wage bump, far exceeding the public sector's average wage adjustment. If politicians were to compensate themselves fairly, the increase would be about 80%, not 300%. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, there was no oversight for these significant increases. According to the Commonwealth Parliamentarians' Pay and Remuneration Survey Outcome Report of 2020 to 2021, in Turks and Caicos, Trinidad and Tobago, and St. Lucia, an independent body or a salaries review commission reviews the remuneration for parliamentarians. But here in Jamaica, guess what? It is the cabinet that reviews this, the cabinet that is comprised of the same beneficiaries of this increase. Now, do you think it is justifiable to grant such an increase without an external review body? Additionally, while those same countries, including Guyana and Barbados, all have laws addressing ministers' salaries, guess what Jamaica relies on? An outdated, flawed framework, not a law. Finally, the government engaged in extensive consultation sessions for the public sector compensation review to ensure fairness. However, not one single consultation session was held on their own salary increase. They excluded public from this discussion, the same Jamaicans that they are accountable. It is unjustifiable.
Thank you very much for those very insightful perspectives. At this time, we're going to transition to our cross-question section, beginning with the opposition side. Team JIS, you have 5 minutes on the clock. You can ask questions of Team SDC. Note, though, that your questions must be capped at 20 seconds each, and Team SDC, your responses are also capped at 45 seconds each, all right? And of course, at the end of the 5 minutes allotted for questioning from GIS, we'll extend that privilege to Team SDC. Your 5 minutes begin now, GIS.
Thank you. Oh, can you hear me? Yes. Question, how can you justify a pay increase for a job with no established or measurable description?
All right, so if we are following this issue closely, the Prime Minister would have tabled draft job descriptions and also a proposal for a performance management system last year. Importantly, follow-up should be done to ensure that that is implemented, but the draft has been tabled.
Right, it was tabled after the increase was given. So how do you mentioned the whole chicken and egg, so how does that stand as justified?
Well, the compensation review process across the public sector, it's not a static sort of process. So as we enter into its third year, anomalies and various issues have come to the fore. And these draft job descriptions are tabled in the second year of the process. So as we close out the process and all of these issues are coming to the fore, of course the TIU, the Ministry of Finance and Government, will seek to improve on that and ensure that those things are done.
Okay, so you spoke about job descriptions, and we're aware that Ernst & Young was a consultant that came into the process and looked at the job descriptions. Did this consultant look at the job descriptions of the politicians before their increases were granted?
All right. So we're looking at the issue of job descriptions now. But up to this point, after 21 years when politicians were never granted an increase, no one thought about their job descriptions. But now that we're at a place where across the public sector, every category of work has received an increase, and because we're trying to demonize our political representatives in this low-trust, anti-government society, we are hung up on this issue of descriptions. The draft descriptions have been tabled. What we need to do is to ensure that follow-up is done to ensure that these descriptions are implemented. And the Prime Minister himself would have stated that the Jamaican people should do more to advocate on behalf of the people to ensure that the job descriptions are implemented.
All right, for correction, the SASO Committee of 1980 recommended that job descriptions be implemented and measurable outcomes given to politicians. 1980 it wasn't done. Question, can you outline how politicians' job in their requirements and what they're required to do outstrips other jobs in the public sector that warrants their 300% increase?
All right, so first,
So we spoke about the functional importance of a social role, and we'd have indicated that it's not a case where other roles are not socially important. But these persons all report to the governance framework. There's a hierarchical structure that we follow. And if it is that there's a mechanism where these persons report to these individuals, and the persons at the helm ought to be compensated. And that is why we would have posited that these politicians would have occupied a position that is functional importance, and because the social role is greater than, then they ought to be compensated more.
The politicians are public sector servants. They're stewards of the resources that we have given to them. Please tell me how a servant can grant their own increase without an external consultation and approval.
All right, let me point out something that you would have mentioned that they are public servants. But let me say that the whole system would have started many years ago where only the opulent were allowed to be politicians. At that time, they were not paid. However, the politicians, it is now a profession, and hence they are being paid and the responsibility is greater than. So is it that you're suggesting that we go back to the initial stage where persons were not paid, females were not allowed to be a part of, and it was just the opulents that are a part of it? Or do we pay our politicians and demand more and attach to them certain roles and responsibilities?
You mentioned persons reporting to them. Who reports to the politicians?
I mean, monthly, councillors.
All right, so let us look at the reporting framework in government overall. In a ministry, you have a minister, you have a permanent secretary, you have a chief technical director. Of course, the minister sets a policy sort of framework, and the technical staff in the ministry does programmatic work to ensure that policies are met and done. So the representatives, the permanent secretary, chief technical director, have to, of course, report to the minister on whether or not policy directives are being met.
I'm sorry. The permanent secretaries report to the cabinet secretary, not to the minister. Can you name one country in the world where an increase of this magnitude was granted in such a short time?
Well, we have to look at what the key economic indicators are. And it's not a case that this large increase was granted in such a short time for just political representative. the country has gone through a comprehensive public sector review process, and all categories along those 16 bands have received a significant increase. At its lowest, 50%, at its highest, 432%. And our political representatives did not receive that 432% increase. Okay? So comparatively, a lot has been happening. The economy is performing quite well, and because of that, across the board, every category of public sector work has received an increase.
Thank you.
I believe that figure you're looking for at the lower end is 20%, not 50.
Right.
Can you name a country?
Sorry, time. I apologize.
Okay.
Time. Thank you very much. May I invite you to give them a round of applause. Very well done. All right, so we're going to now pause for 1 minute to allow you to refresh yourselves and to... Oh, no, sorry. We are going to switch. So we're going to have... Apologies. That was just so much information. I thought there was just not much more left. All right. Let's carry on then. So we are now going to have the team from Social Development Commission asking questions of Team Jamaica Information Service. Your
All right.
5 minutes begins now.
The second speaker mentioned that politicians would have gotten an increase without public consultation. Why do you think it was prudent to have public consultation for the payment of politicians as opposed to other civil servants?
Not as opposed to, but being that the politicians report directly, they are accountable to the people of Jamaica. They should say to the people of Jamaica, this is our intent, but they did not. They just went ahead and increased their own salaries without even saying to us, let us hear what you have to say about what we plan to do.
Also, if you take it within the framework of the compensation review, where there were consultations on every other category of public sector workers, it stands to reason that the politicians should also have had consultation on their increase.
All right. So a question, you keep on repeating this point that politicians granted themselves an increase. Are you dismissing the work and the role of the Transformation Implementation Unit?
By no means are we doing that. But you see, the Transformation Implementation Unit did the groundwork, but they cannot grant the increase themselves. Cabinet granted the increase, and every member of Cabinet is a member of Parliament and a politician, and they are all beneficiaries of this increase, not the TIU, not the employees of the TIU.
But you mentioned that no external body would have looked at this, yet you also referenced that consultants were a part of this process, which had been led by the TIU, and proposals were then tabled to Cabinet based on the professional estimation of the TIU and those independent consultants.
The recommendations from the TIU are from a small subset of the public service and not even from the entire country of Jamaica. They are accountable to the entire country, not the TIU. And as such, they should have consulted Jamaica, the people of Jamaica, but they did no such thing.
Okay, so in that vein, should the police officers that received an increase consult the people of Jamaica about their increase? Should the medical doctors also consult the people of Jamaica about their increase?
They serve Jamaicans.
They are public servants.
The consultations were in fact done on all other categories of public sector workers except the politicians, and that's the point we're saying. So police, doctors, everybody fall under public sector workers.
All right, you keep mentioning this line of consultations being done to determine what the salaries across the board are. I presume that you mean that these consultations were being done by the Transformation Implementation Unit.
Sir, I don't know that we need to get into who did what. Consultations were done, and if you follow the line of how the compensation restructuring exercise was set out, the consultations were done. It was job descriptions that determined the level of increase that persons got when the job descriptions were evaluated. We've made the point that the job descriptions for politicians came about after the increase was granted.
And once more, because of the nature of this exercise, where the Transformation Implementation Unit and government tried to compress 332 pay scales into 16, of course, issues and anomalies are going to come to the fore. The descriptions are tabled in the second year. We're in the final year, so all outstanding issues are going to be addressed in the final year.
The issues are... Oh, sorry. Go ahead. What's the question? What's the question?
So,
No,
you,
we're not supposed.
So remember, you have to ask your question within
20
seconds.
seconds.
20 seconds is up. Are you responding?
Oh, there was no question.
Okay, you can go ahead and ask the question.
20 seconds, go.
all right. So, quite clearly, the relevant processes would have started to compress 332 pay scales into 16. So, are you not cognizant of the fact that, despite the fact that the job descriptions are tabled in the second year, the process is such that if there are anomalies, the TIU, the Ministry of Finance, will try to address those in the final year of the process?
Question. There was
a question. It said, are you not
Yes,
cognizant?
are you not cognizant? Yes, it is
That
a question.
outstanding issues are going to be dealt with in the final year.
we are cognizant.
So you're cognizant that the outstanding issues are going to be dealt with in the final year. You said that.
Well, the compensation restructuring exercise has a 3-year, there were 3 phases. The second phase was a job factor evaluation. As far as I know, the job factor evaluation has not yet been completed. The point we're making, though, is that the politicians' 3 years, there don't seem to be phases. Everything was condensed into 12 months, and they got everything within 12 months, while the people are still out here not getting, there are people who are still not getting the amount of pay that they were getting before the restructuring exercise began.
So a question, are you aware that the anomalies in the process are not as a result of the Ministry of Finance or central government?
I think we're aware that the anomalies are as a result of taking on a very complex exercise to restructure. But how is that relevant to this?
All right, thank you very much. A round of applause. I think after all of that, we need a small break, eh? Yeah. Somebody say we need something strong as well. I won't comment on that. All right, let us take, regrettably, we're limited to 1 minute break. So we'll just take 1 minute. We'll maximize it to the best extent possible. And then after the 1 minute pause has ended, we'll resume with the reply speeches, beginning with that from the opposition team, rather, and then we conclude with the reply speech from Team Social Development Commission. Your 1 minute begins now. Now to conclude the debate with the reply speeches. So this time I call upon the reply speaker from Team Jamaica Information Service. Let's make that speaker welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, judges, team, and my worthy opponents, good afternoon. The opposition reiterates that the granting of such a significant salary increase to politicians in Jamaica was not justified. Mr. Speaker, those entrusted with power are expected to act justly and be perceived as just. An increase fitting within the budget does not necessarily mean it was justified. The move in itself was socially dissonant and unnecessarily steep. The average public sector worker got a 20% bump in their salaries, and it is nowhere close to the near livable wage that one politician said their pay increase of $16 million brought them up to. This deepens the argument that there are clashing realities in this country on what is considered a just salary. Then there's the power play. In what job can you announce your own raise with no external checks or law or regulation or audit? What justified the increase? Now, this line of questioning leads me to revisit the beautiful architecture of the moot to find that the word hiding in plain sight is granting. It's not just the figure or percentage, but the unchecked power to grant such an increase without a guiding body. Nothing akin to a services commission guiding, leading, or legitimizing the process. And so we ask, what stands as justified when the group benefiting from a decision has the final say? Who then becomes the justifier, the beneficiary? What does that say about transparency and accountability? So you can, unchallenged and without evaluation, which everyone else in the public sector had to endure, make a decision that benefits you in such a way that it puts you leagues ahead of the average man? A politician with no clear-cut, readily accessible and approved job description before the fact of the increase, or performance measurements and checks, receiving over $20 million in a country where the birth rate is dropping partly because young people choose not to have children, because we cannot afford them and have no houses to put them in, of an expensive market, and struggle to keep our heads above rising supermarket bills is tone-deaf, off-key, and off-beat. The increase was also clearly found to be unjustified by the people of this country who have sounded the alarm with their backlash. And you know, it may be easy for the proposition to sit and say politicians would be lambasted no matter what kind of raise they got, damned if they do, damned if they don't, right? But Jamaican people are paying attention. The scale and magnitude of the increase is the issue. The way it was done is the issue. The short space of time is the issue. I'm sure the response would be different if their increase was at 20% over 3 years, accompanied by consultations and job evaluations. We could have at least seen that as equitable. Where was the process for the politicians? This is already a group of people who are not only paid well above the average Jamaican, but they enjoy prestige and perks, such as allowances that an admin assistant would never dream of accessing. It is an inequitable increase, and in the face of a growing gap between the rich and poor in this country, it seems the politicians built themselves a tiny raft since they're moving on up to the east side. The proposition would have mentioned the fact that the government can afford it. But can the government afford widespread public distrust and scrutiny? Because guess what? They easily bought that for the low, low cost of $1.7 billion. Perhaps our Prime Minister understood that he could not afford it, and that's why he decided not to take the 300% increase. The Finance Minister's argument to attract the best minds falls short. The political directorate is small, and older parliamentarians cling to their posts, making it hard for the best and brightest to enter. So where on the tiny raft are you putting those you seek to attract? And in the words of Alston High School's Dean of Discipline, Mr. Andre A.O. Wellington, in his letter to the editor, and I quote, "It can't be right that public sector workers endure years of wage freeze and single-digit salary adjustments, and the political directorate comes out at the end of all the major sacrifices made and takes on to itself the highest portion of the wage increase. The political directorate deserves a decent salary, but not the massive salary increases announced." Mr. Speaker, the opposition firmly believes that the granting of such a significant salary increase to politicians in Jamaica was not justified. The opposition rests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And although I'm minded to sing a tune to call on the next speaker, because I can't sing, I won't do it. So let's do it the way I'm accustomed to doing it. Let us invite at this time to conclude this fantastic debate the reply speaker from Team Social Development Commission. Hear, hear.
honorable judges, my opponents, my team, Jamaica, good afternoon. Now, Jamaica in 2024 is a very different place. Unemployment in Jamaica stands at 4%. Our debt to GDP ratio stands at 72%, projected to fall to 62% next year. Inflation is at a record low of 5%. It's clear by all the key economic indicators the economy is performing well. It is on that backdrop that the government of Jamaica undertook a comprehensive review of public sector salaries across the board. Not a salary increase for political representatives, increases for all categories of workers across the board. Now, the key economic indicators are performing well because of the legislative, the policy, and the program direction that our educated, experienced political leadership has undertaken. When you look at the work that a political representative, such as a local government representative, is expected to do, they are expected to ensure that we have water, roads, light, and that garbage is collected on a regular basis. But when you look at how they were remunerated, they were getting $1.7 million per year. How could they survive for 21 years with such low levels of remuneration? Added to that is the fact that because we live in a low-trust society, once you enter the political sphere, you suffer great reputational risk and damage. Even if you were pure before, it is assumed that you are corrupt or you have the potential to be corrupt. So when persons enter the political sphere, they enter with this risk attached. Added to that is the fact that our political representatives often have to work in violent spaces with high levels of gang activity. So much so that just 2 years ago, one of our local government representatives was killed in the line of duty because it is alleged that he spoke out against gang activity in his division. So we want persons to risk their reputation, risk their livelihoods, risk their lives, yet poorly pay them. That cannot be just. Now, our opponents kept on saying that our political representatives granted themselves an increase. That is so far from the case. Whilst there are various committees, 5, that proposed several proposals to grant an increase of political representatives, added to that job descriptions, etc. When the process of compensation review started, this was done by an arm of government, the Transformation Implementation Unit, supported by independent consultants that put forward a framework for the entire public service. That included looking at their jobs, getting job descriptions, looking at what is required of the role. So increases for our political representatives were not granted in isolation. It was granted in a context where all persons across the public sector were getting significant increases. When you look at our social workers getting an increase of 432%, where's the protest about that? It's quite clear that persons believe that they deserve their increase. But because we live in this low-trust society where we demonize our political representatives, yet expect so much from them, we're of the view that their increase was not justified. And we, Team Proposition, are of the considered view that given the key economic indicators, given what is required from our political representatives, given the trajectory that the country is going on, and given the fact that across the public sector, significant salary increases were granted to all categories of workers, we're of the view that the granting of significant salary increases to politicians in Jamaica was justified. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Team SDC and Team JIS. This was, in fact, a very delightful experience. Thank you. And of course, I'm sure you would also agree, Aniki.
Indeed, I agree 110% that it was an exciting match. To listen to the arguments, I would want to be you. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we take a break. The judges will deliberate. For those of you online, you can grab a cup of tea or drink. For those of you in the room, you are welcome to refreshments next door. And the next voice you hear will be that of the chair adjudicator, who will share the results of the match. I'm sure.
Listen, magic happens only once, you know. Mic check. 1, 2. Ladies and gentlemen, I come bearing good news of glad tidings. This was a match better than any other match we've had in the competition so far. And let me put some numbers to quantify the quality of this match. The team that loses in this match would have won any of the other matches because they end with a whopping 295 points. And of course, we have a record. We have breached the 300 mark for the first time ever. 310 is the score that the winning team leaves with. Ladies and gentlemen, stop wowing. Give them a round of applause. Yes, they deserve it. They deserve it. So we're talking about a very charged and challenging issue. The compensation that our politicians have, I don't want to take sides, but I'm going to say something challenging, granted themselves. Yes? And the question is this justified? Is it reasonable? Is it fair? Is it granted on the basis of some objective criteria that causes them and us, the Jamaican public at large, to feel like, yeah, they deserve it? So, Team SDC tells us that, well, there was a study done in the 1980s, an independent study that recommended that this is the rate of compensation that is deserving to our politicians. They further justified it by sort of qualifying and explaining what the role and importance of a politician is. Yes, the fact that they are the executives of our country. And anything that goes wrong, the blame is on them. They face enormous pressures. The burdens of running the country is theirs to bear, and it is reasonable, it is just, Team Social Development Commission tells us, for them to receive that level of compensation. What compensation are we talking about? Between 100 and 300%. And of course, this was juxtaposed or placed within the context of a broader public sector review program, which would have seen the average, we're told, 20% granted to other public sector workers. Of course, there are some outliers. Some groups of employees would have gotten somewhere in the region of 400%. But the average, we're told, is 20%. One of the things that we found most important and impactful in this debate was the comparative between what transpires and what has happened in Jamaica and other jurisdictions. The analysis surrounding what are the economic trends in other jurisdictions. We heard about the United States. We heard about Trinidad and other such countries, their GDP, their rate of economic growth, and Jamaica. And the question then arose, posed to us by Jamaica Information Service, should compensation not be linked to something? It's not linked to PMAS. It's not linked to a job description, because a job description has just been tabled. It's still a green paper. And so what then is the basis for us to grant such a high compensation? Is it the rate of economic growth? Is it the strength of the economy? And the comparative with other countries, Australia included, proved to us that maybe that's not the point from which we source a justification. The next idea we get in this debate was this idea about, well, what exactly is the important role that politicians play beyond being a politician, particularly particularly in the Jamaican context, they are looked to as being the saviors of everybody's issues, or the messiahs, I should say, providing solutions, the enormous burdens. And yes, they should be compensated for that. We heard in the second speaker's presentation some excellent analysis. I remember when I was doing sociology, those were some of the ideas I encountered. Sociology is from functionalist theories that speaks about the need for a society to establish some kind of an incentive within the society so that people are motivated to move up and aspire to ascend to higher positions within the economy and within the society. And we felt that that was very good theoretical information. What we felt was somewhat needed was some grounding within the Jamaican context. So we got the functionalism, we got some other sociological theories that sounded right to us, but when we tried to apply it within the Jamaican context, given our nuance, we felt like some deeper, more stringent application was needed on that front. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the final point of assessment is, what are the people saying and how are the people feeling? Because a politician's action is not just objectively right or wrong. A politician's action must be measured, evaluated based on who their bosses or how their bosses feel, the people of Jamaica. And the sense that we got from GIS strongly was that the Jamaican people are not pleased. They don't feel that it is just. And in as much as Jamaicans don't feel that it is just, then apparently it is not just. So here we come upon a sort of point of assessing what constitutes the justice, the extent to which this action is just. Right? It's not just an objective assessment as Team Social Development Corporation would want us to view. It's also dependent on how people feel when they look at their own paychecks, when they look at their own earnings and their own economic situations. And that matters. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I could go on and on and on, but alas, we've come to that point where we must make a declaration. Feel happy, irrespective of the outcome, irrespective of where your team plays in this match, that you did a job that is beyond commendable. And so, in this final match in the public sector debate competition for 2024, round 2. Sorry, it felt like a grand finals. It did, it really did. The winner comes to us from Team Opposition, Jamaica Information Service. Congratulations, Team GIS, and very, very well tried, Social Development Commission. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have another major announcement. And we had some contention as a panel to decide who gets the prize award as being the best debater. The best debater comes to us from Team GIS, the person who contributed the most impactful ideas in the debate, the second speaker. But to reflect the, dare I say, division, adjudicators, the division on the panel on that matter. So that was the majority consensus. But to reflect the division, we want to announce a commendable debater. That debater, the third speaker, also from Team GIS. That's the reply speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's a great way to end round 2. Really, really pleased. Thank you very much.